So, Professor Daan Kromhout, I'm really glad to have this interview with you. Thank you for your patience. And I would like to start with the first question. You are one of the researchers of the 7-country studies. Um, how did it happen that you started to work with this group?
Oh, that will be a long story.
In short.
In short, yeah. The way it went was that I belong to the second generation of the 7-country study, because the study started in 1958 and I am born in 1950. So
You were too young.
I was too young for the first generation. And in the Netherlands there is the cohort of Zutphen, and my predecessors, Professor van Buchem, who was Professor of Internal Medicine and Cardiology in the Netherlands, and my own professor who taught nutrition and health, they were of the same generation, and they retired around 1975 or something like that. And then there was in the Netherlands nobody interested in continuing the Zutphen study.
Really? Nobody?
Nobody, because there were no epidemiologists in that time. If there were epidemiologists, it were mainly physicians, but who taught them by themselves, and there was not a formal master program or something like that. And I studied human nutrition at Wageningen University, and I did my PhD thesis on risk factors for cardiovascular disease in school children, and that was mostly serum cholesterol and diet where we worked on. And I was very much interested in epidemiology, but the point was how to continue. And in 1975, when I was a PhD student, I went to a seminar of the World Health Federation, and there all the top people on epidemiology, like Jeremiah Stemler and Jeffrey Rose from London, and the statistician Dick Remington from the United States, they were the faculty. It was really a fantastic faculty. And I became so enthusiastic about starting a career on epidemiology that when I came back in the Netherlands, I had worked only for 2 years on my PhD, but I had to go another 2 years, and I went to Professor Den Hartog, the professor in nutrition, and I said I was in Mexico for a seminar, and there they showed me the data from the 7-country study, and then I saw that, of course, there was also a Dutch cohort, but it was for the first time in my life that I heard about the Zutphen cohort. I never heard about it when I was taught in the Netherlands on nutrition. And then I went to Professor Den Hartog and said, I have been in Mexico and I like to work on the Zutphen data. And he said, there are 2 vacancies for the internist and for the nutritionist, and nobody is interested, so you can start tomorrow. And then I said to him, no, I first like to finish my thesis because I'm halfway, so that will be 2 years, so you will not be interested in me because I really prefer to do that first. And then he said, no, it's no problem, there's nobody in the Netherlands, so I wait for another 2 years. And then I finished my thesis and went to the University of Leiden as an assistant professor in epidemiology and nutrition. And during the interview they said, what type of research would you like to do? And I said, I like to work on the Zutphen study in collaboration with Professor Ansel Keys from Minneapolis. But nobody had heard from Ansel Keys in Minneapolis,
really?
in the Department of Social Medicine, because they were not interested in those type of things. But they said, okay, you are young and you are enthusiastic, so you can become assistant professor and you can do what you like to do. And then in 1979, I went for the first time to a meeting of the 7-country study that was in Crete, close to Heraklion, the capital city of Crete. And at that time I was 29 years old. and the whole first generation of the PIs from the different countries, and Ansel Keys himself and Henry Blackburn, they were all there. It was a fantastic experience, and one of the jokes that I have from that time was that one of the old professors came to me and asked whether I was whether I was a grandson of one of the professors. And then I had to say, I am the investigator from the Zutphen study.
The next one.
And that was the way it went.
What was the first impression you had of Ansel Keys and Henry Blackburn, all this old generation of pioneers?
The whole setting, I mean, being on the island of Crete, and I was together with my wife who was pregnant, so it was also a special situation. But they accepted me from the first moment, and I really also felt home during that first meeting that we had, and it was really a fantastic experience. And I met there also for the first time Alessandro Menotti, and after me he was the second youngest, and from the first moment, and he said, could we collaborate together? And that was in the time, you know, that Ansel Keys had coordinated the first, the second and the third round, and then there was a period of 15 years that there was only a collection of mortality data, and then we went on with the elderly studies in the 7 country study. And Alessandro said, could we collaborate, and that we first finished the mortality follow-up for all the cohorts, and I had to do that for Zutphen. And that went really fantastic, because the last cohort that went into the study was the Belgrade professors. That was in 1964, and 25 years later was of course 1989, and we have organized it in the way that in 1990 we had the 25-year mortality data coded, and Alessandro and I, we understood each other very well, and we did just the work. And in 1990, I went together with one of my co-workers to Rome, and we worked for a week on the database, and to see whether there were missings or wrong data and those type of things. And then we could directly start with the 25-year mortality data 1 year after the last cohort was closed, and that was also a great experience.
Did you go to all the 7 countries of the study? Did you visit all of them?
Not all, but very many. I have been, of course, in Minneapolis many times. I went to Finland frequently, to Italy very frequently, and I have been both in Crevalcore and Monte Giorgio, and Alessandro is in Rome, and I've been many times in Rome. I've been on Crete and Corfu. I have been in Japan, in Tanushimaru, and I like to go to Ushibuka, but they did not give me the opportunity, the Japanese, and I don't know for what reason. It is very remote, and I've asked them several times, but you know, Japanese people don't like to say no, then they just say nothing, and that means that they don't invite you.
You don't have to insist.
Yeah. So I think, and in Greece, I've been in Corfu and in Crete. So I think I've been in Serbia, in Zrenjanin, in Belgrade, and in Velika, but I've never been to the Croatian ones, because our colleague there stopped after 25 years. We have not a further follow-up. There are 3 cohorts with only 25-year follow-up, and that are the 2 Croatians and the Rome Railroad.
Did you handle numbers, or did you manage with real people in these cohorts?
No, what we did was, in the first period, it was just collecting the mortality data, and then we had the risk factor data and the dietary data from the first 3 rounds, and we did a lot of analysis. That was just statistical analysis with the available data, and with cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality as the endpoint, and then we did a lot of analysis on that. But we started in 1984 with the elderly component of the 7-country study, and there we collected all the data in Finland, Italy, and the Netherlands, and in 91 in Crete, and the Serbians they did it in 87, 88, and 89, and with the exception of Crete, one of my co-workers went there, but in the 3 Serbian cohorts, I was always available when they were doing the examinations. And I took the blood samples to the Netherlands, and in our laboratory it was analyzed so that you get highly valid information.
When was the first time you heard the word Mediterranean diet?
Yeah, I think already during the first meeting on the island of Crete, because we were in the middle of the Mediterranean, but it was not in the way that it was really defined. They say, okay, this is the Mediterranean and this is the Mediterranean diet, but we did not work on it, let's say, from a scientific point of view, that we defined the Mediterranean diet. And in the 7-country study, Professor Fidanza here from Italy, he defined what I told in my talk today, the Mediterranean Adequacy Index. But that he did it quite late. I think it was, the paper is I think from 2004, and but we had also in 2004 a paper in the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and there we analyzed the data with the Mediterranean diet score that was developed by Professor Antonia Ricopre, who's also here today. And her score, we use them for the elderly study of the 7-country study in combination with the Seneca study, and we got a grant of 800,000 euros from the European Union for doing the analysis for the data. So the first real paper that we produced based on the 7 countries study with individual data, but that was also in connection with another European study. That was from 2004. So it took quite a long time before we really operationalized in a scientific way the Mediterranean diet.
And how in your country is perceived the Mediterranean diet today?
The Mediterranean diet and, let's say, Mediterranean foods are becoming more and more popular, but there is a strong divide. I mean, the highly educated people, I think almost everything nowadays are using at least to have extra virgin olive oil on the salads and those type of things. But the people who are lower educated, they go for, let's say, the ordinary Dutch diet, but that's generally speaking, because there are always exceptions, of course. But when I compare, let's say, the current Dutch diet, or say the current Dutch diet from the last 10-15 years, with the one that we had when we started in 1960, there were a lot of changes. And most
for the better, or
most in the better way. For bread, we eat almost completely white bread in the 60s, and there was only 30% on brown bread. There was even not wholemeal bread at that time. But in '85, 25 years later, it was completely the other way around. It was only 30% white bread, and it was 70% brown or wholemeal bread. So the dietary fiber content of the Dutch diet is relatively high. Another thing is we got rid of the trans fatty acids started in the 1990s, and it took till about between 2005 and 2010 then we came to less than 1% of energy from trans fatty acids. So we got rid of that, and that was that had an impressive effect also on the occurrence of coronary heart disease. And in relation to milk, we are really a dairy country in the Netherlands. And when I was a kid, there was only whole fat milk. And nowadays it's more than 80% that is low fat milk. So that's also a big change. So and there was also an increase of fruit between 1960 and 85, but later on there was a decline. And what we see nowadays in the Netherlands is that the people above the age of 40, they still have a reasonably high intake of fruit, but the younger ones, they eat not so much fruit. Even my own children, when they were students, when they came home and my wife and I said, you have to eat some fruit, then the answer was, would you prepare it for me?
So they are lazy.
and we did that. But
so they want a fruit salad directly.
Yeah. But they don't like to have an apple or an orange. Then
they have to peel.
We had to prepare.
Well, peeling an apple was a part of education in the past, probably not now. You contributed on writing the line guides of nutrition in Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose inspired by the Mediterranean diet.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest now to the people who live in Netherlands?
We put it in a broader context. We analyzed for the dietary guidelines over 3 years 1,200 meta-analysis and systematic reviews, and we judged them critically. So when they had done subgroup analysis that were homogeneous, then we went through all the different subgroups and find out whether we agreed or not in relation to what they found the best thing. And in terms of dietary patterns, we analyzed the Mediterranean diet, we analyzed the new Nordic diet, and the vegetarian diet. And all three showed that in relation to cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality, there was a 20% lower risk when you go on one of those diets in comparison to ordinary Western diets.
So did you propose a sort of North European Mediterranean diet? Is it possible?
Yeah, till a certain level. I mean, you have your, let's say, own local diet, and at least in the Netherlands, but I think the same happened in Norway, that the Norwegian colleague of mine and another one from the Netherlands, they said, okay, you use the Mediterranean diet score in the JAMA paper where I was alluding to, but you did that also for the Netherlands and for Finland, and that is not the Mediterranean diet. And let's say that they are correct, but when you take the food groups in the Mediterranean diet score of Professor Trigopoulos, then you have fruit, you have vegetables, you have legumes, you have fish, you have the fatty acids, the meat, and the dairy, and we are eating all those things. But it's not Mediterranean what we have in the Netherlands. But when I look to, let's say, the nutritional components and the relations with health and chronic diseases, then there is not much difference between the Mediterranean diet, the new Nordic diet, and the vegetarian diet, because also the Mediterranean diet is a plant food based diet, especially from the beginning. And in our guidelines we have now the slogan eat more plant foods and less animal foods. So in a way the differences are not that big, but when you go to individual foods, then there are of course substantial differences.
So what is the new Nordic diet?
It's just let's say a Nordic diet score, and what they do is that the foods that are not healthy or desirable, they change that to better food. So they go also back to eating more legumes. What they have done in the past, especially in the rural areas in Norway. To give an example of in the way that they are doing that. And they had also a very high amount of saturated fat in their diet 20-25 years ago, and there was even one of the intervention studies where they replaced saturated fat by polyunsaturated fat that showed a very nice reduction in coronary disease. So they changed also from butter to soft margarines, and it's along those lines.
So can we say that the Keyes equation works in any food system?
Yes, when you just calculate the amount of saturated fat and you express it in a percentage of total energy, then it works everywhere.
Do you follow the Mediterranean diet?
Yeah, it's a combination of a Dutch diet and a Mediterranean, but we have always olive oil in our kitchen. We eat legumes once a week, and in the Netherlands you never put oil on legumes, and we are doing that in combination with some other things, and so it's a combination of a Mediterranean type of diet and a Dutch diet.
What you cook for Christmas and also for New Year's Eve?
I cook every year for Christmas and for the last day of the year, and for Christmas then generally I start to cook one day before, because to make some complex dishes, and it has also to taste, of course, very well, and I enjoy that very much doing that. And for the end of the year I have a special Dutch tradition. We call that oliebollen, and in the United States, when I also prepare them over there, then they said it's the Dutch donut, but it has other qualities than the American donut. When you make the dough, you add currants, you add apple to it, and you can also other hard fruit put in it if you like, and you have to fry them in the way that you are between 170 and 180 degrees, and if you go below, then it does not taste. It is then still the dough, but when you go above 180, then they are becoming black. So that is also not what you really like, and I really enjoy it preparing those, and for my children and their friends, and for my wife, we prepare them, and we really like it. This old Dutch tradition.
Do you eat it with something else or alone?
No, you can eat it alone, but you can also present it in combination with tea and coffee. And also when you have a buffet, you can also put them in for, let's say, the last phase of the buffet, that you use it as a type of dessert. You can use it in several ways.
Is there any Italian dish you can cook?
Yeah, let's say to work with pasta, that is quite common to do that, and I do that also incidentally. I also like to work with legumes. I prepare them and also add olive oil. And in the Netherlands, that is never done. You just eat your legumes, and that's it. That was the traditional way in the Netherlands when I was a kid.
So it was with pig, with pork, or without anything?
Yeah, it was also. It was not necessary, of course, to add meat because there is a lot of plant protein in the legumes. But what they did sometimes in the Netherlands, that they took minced meat and they made a ball of that, and then they combined that with the legumes.
What do you think about the risttafel?
Yeah, that is of course in relation to our colonial time, because that came from the east, and there are a lot of restaurants in the Netherlands. And when I was young, I could eat a whole rijsttafel. but nowadays, if I would do that, I will become obese. So I am not eating it any longer. But that's just it's too much food. And
how many dishes were supposed to be in the menu?
10 to 15 or something like that.
Mm.
And when we were young, I took also the rest of the rijsttafel of my wife, but I don't like to do that now.
What was the first aim of the 7-country study? Was to show that cholesterol was really a bad evil, or it was something different?
It's hard to answer that question. I have asked that especially to Henry Blackburn, and he said also that it's hard to find out what the real idea was. And SCS, of course, he did all the preliminary studies for the 7 countries to see the countries where the mortality and incidence from cardiovascular disease was high and low, and his point was how does it relate to diet, and on the individual level you could not find at that time associations, and on the population level he expected to find the associations. But I think that for the ecological analysis that and SCS was interested in the Mediterranean diet, whether the Mediterranean cohorts had the lowest risk of coronary disease, but he took also Japan because he had also experience from before that the Japanese had a low serum cholesterol level. So let's say in relation to the diet, he was interested in the population level. When you take the risk factors like serum cholesterol and blood pressure, I think he was more interested in serum cholesterol than in blood pressure. But in the book from 1980, he also has a very nice chapter on blood pressure and even on lung function. So he was interested in more than, let's say, the saturated fat and the Mediterranean diet issue. He was also very much interested in the risk factors and also in risk factors that are not that were not commonly examined, like the lung function. Lung function is of course used in relation to lung diseases, but much less to cardiovascular disease. But he showed that there is also a very strong association on the individual level between lung function and the lung disease. So it was, let's say, a very broad hypothesis were tested, and it became more refined during the course of the study.
What would you answer to the author of The Big Fat Surprise? Did she understand what was the first intention of the 7-country study, or it's too easy now to criticize it after so many years?
When she was working on her book, she called me 5 or 6 times, and we talked over the phone for generally between half an hour and an hour. She had an enormous amount of questions about the study, and I tried them all to answer. But I did not have an idea what she really wanted. When just before she published the book, she asked me whether I had photos from the 7-country study, and I said yes. Of course, I have several of them, and she said, "Can I get them?" And I said, "You can get them, but I first like to read the text because I was not sure what was in the text." And then she said, "No, I'm not interested to send my manuscript." And then I said, "You don't get my pictures."
Mm. Well, I think it's a correct way.
And then I read the book, and it's very well written. She's a very good journalist, that this was her final thing, that she criticized saturated fat enormously, and did not put it in the proper context in relation to what I know on fat and coronary disease.
Not a lot of time ago, the Time magazine had a piece of butter on the cover, and the title was "Eat Butter." But if you read the article, at the end of the article they suggest to follow the Mediterranean diet because it's healthier.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think magazines, newspapers are so interested to save butter, to save the all that food that somehow came out to be not so healthy?
They like it. I think that's the point. And another point is that the prevalence of overweight and obesity, as you know, in the United States is very high. 1/3 of the population is obese, of the adult population, and 1/3 has overweight. And there are now many countries in the world where you see that. And because of the obesity epidemic, people are interested in food, but then in terms of how can I reduce it, and then they like to reduce carbohydrates, and then when they take less carbohydrates, they like to keep their fat relatively high, but still there is a deficit in calories, and that is their real issue. So they come from the perspective of obesity, and not from the perspective what are the fatty acids doing in relation to the occurrence of coronary disease. I think that's the basic thing, and nutrition is not only a question of calories, but it's also a question of having nutrients that are metabolized in a certain way, and that are two different mechanisms. And the emphasis is nowadays, from my perspective, too much on reducing calories and not taking into account the health effects that you can get by having a diet that's very rich in nutrients and bioactive compounds.
Did the 7-country study get to a certain point? Did the 7-country study achieve a result?
There are a lot of books and papers. There are 10 books published about the 7-country study, because in the early days books were more fashionable than articles, and that changed, of course, very much many years ago. And all that information, we have a website about the 7-country study where we summarized the most important results, and we have more than 70 topics where we deal with, and then we took as endpoint coronary heart disease, because there were a lot of studies on coronary heart disease as endpoint, but also all-cause mortality. And there we show the associations with not only diet, but also physical activity, smoking, alcohol, and for the risk factors, the traditional risk factors, but also risk factors that are not so common. If you take that part, we have at least 13 different risk factors in relation to coronary heart disease's endpoint. And we did also research, for instance, in relation to cognitive decline, and we found that when elderly people go into cognitive decline, that, for instance, coffee is important, physical activity is important, omega-3 fatty acids are important, and all that information is available. So there is so much that you can't say what is now the most important finding of the 7-country study. And the ecological dietary data is a very small part. There are probably not more than 10 articles on that topic. And there are 590 where you have all the other information.
Do you have the sensation that you are looking for the secret of longevity?
The reason that when we start to prepare the website, that was in 2012, I got a grant from the Netherlands Royal Academy of Sciences to start it. And then the basic idea was that we would only present the information on coronary heart disease. But we found that we had so many papers also on all-cause mortality that you are moving more and more into the context of healthy aging, and that is also where we now are working about, because 97% of the population is dead, and you can now take as a variable age at death, and that's a very simple variable but gives a lot of information. And what we see now, that when you take the cohort with the lowest age at death and the highest, that's a difference of 12 years. So that's really a remarkable difference. So if you compare Eastern Finland with Crete, then you have a 12-year difference in age at death. And the Cretans, of course, live much longer than the Finns. But the Finns are doing very well by having changed their diet and lifestyle so much over the last 45 years.
Yes, I think that Finland is the proof that if you have a government that works on public health, you get results.
Yeah.
Now I would like to ask you a very personal question. What's your beloved plate, dish? What you really cannot give up in your diet?
That's what I really like. That's the dish that I make frequently during Christmas, and it should have been for Easter because it's lamb. But once we got a magazine around Christmas, and then they had a lamb recipe, and that is originally from Morocco. And what you do is you prepare the lamb, and you add prunes, and you add apricots, and you have couscous, and it's really a marvelous main dish.
And do you eat it with drinking wine or beer?
Wine. No beer with that. Beer is for the Chinese food.
What about French fries? Do you eat them?
No, very seldom.
Very seldom. And one last thing I would like to ask you. What was the talent that you recognized to Ansel Keys?
You mean the talent of Ansel Keys?
Yes.
Yeah, I have read already a lot of papers of him for my PhD thesis because, as I said, my thesis was about risk factors for coronary disease with serum cholesterol as the most important one, and he did a lot of research on serum cholesterol, and not only in relation to fatty acids but also in relation to coronary heart disease. And I was impressed by what I read in the literature. And in 1975, when I went to the seminar in Mexico, after the seminar, I did a trip through the United States for 5 weeks, and I visited 15 research institutes that were working on epidemiology or diet or cardiovascular disease. And I went also to Minneapolis, and for the reason that I knew his articles, but Ansel was not there. But David Jacobs, where I collaborate still with, was there, and that was the first time that I was in Minneapolis. And I was impressed by the place, and I met him, Ansel Keys, in person for the first time in 1979 at Crete, and then he asked me also to give a talk over there, and then I took serum cholesterol in the Zutphen study, and the line was completely straight from 1960 to 1978 in serum cholesterol. And then when I had given my talk, he said, it's very clear, the stubborn Dutch never change. And then I knew what type of person he was.
Did you expect him to reach the age of 100 years? Do you think he was lucky, or his lifestyle really made the difference?
He told me once that he had been a smoker in the past, but that was not for an extremely long time. So on a certain moment when he realized that smoking was not good for his health, he stopped. And I have been several times here to Priopi, and then Margaret and Ansel asked me to stay in the guest house, and Margaret prepared then special dishes, and that are also the dishes that are in Eat Well and Stay Well. And when I saw that in reality, I could imagine that they were living on a very good diet. But in general, I mean, people who are becoming 100 years or older, of course, the diet and lifestyle plays a role, but also if you are lucky, because when you go into an accident, for instance, that can also happen. So luck is also playing a role.
Yes. So good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kromhout.